Tomorrow morning, you will walk past a cemetery. You probably won't even register it. The headstones, the manicured lawn, the silent rows of names, it's furniture. But to your ancestors, the body in the ground beneath that grass would have been the most important spiritual and emotional object on Earth. For modern people, death is something we hand over to hospitals, to funeral directors. By the time the body reaches us, it has been washed, dressed, embalmed, and placed in a box. For nearly all of human history, no one was coming.
When someone in your tribe died, you and the people around you had to do something with the body. And what they chose to do tells us more about what it means to be human than almost any other artifact in the archaeological record. So how did ancient humans deal with death? The short answer is that they invented us.
Let's start with the oldest evidence. Deep inside a cave system in northern Spain called Sima de los Huesos, which translates to the pit of bones, paleontologists have recovered the remains of at least 28 individuals. They aren't Homo sapiens. They aren't even Neanderthals exactly. They are an older lineage, ancestors to both, and they died roughly 430,000 years ago. What they were doing at the bottom of a 43-foot vertical shaft inside a pitch-black cave has only one plausible explanation. They were placed there. There are no signs of mass disaster, no carnivore damage on the bones. Someone, or many someones across generations, dropped their dead into that shaft on purpose. And in 1998, researchers found a single, beautiful hand axe down there with them.
A bright red quartzite blade, unused. The team nicknamed it Excalibur. It may be the oldest grave good in human history. Before language as we would recognize it, before agriculture, before anatomically modern humans even existed, our pre-human ancestors were already doing something with their dead that no other animal does. They were treating them like they still mattered. The real explosion of death rituals begins with our cousins, the Neanderthals. For decades, the public image of the Neanderthal was the brutish caveman with no inner life. That image is dead. At Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq, archaeologists have unearthed the deliberate burial of an individual known as Shanidar IV. In the 1960s, the excavator Ralph Bilecki found dense clusters of fossilized pollen in the soil packed around the body. He called it the flower burial and argued that more than 60,000 years ago, Neanderthals had laid their dead to rest on a bed of wildflowers. That interpretation has been argued about ever since. Some researchers think the pollen came from burrowing bees. But in 2020, a team led by Emma Pomeroy re-excavated the site and confirmed at least this much. The bodies in Shanidar Cave were intentionally buried, not abandoned. Somebody dug a hole, laid them in it, and walked away changed.
Then, sometime in the deep prehistory of our own species, the rituals get louder.
Around 34,000 years ago, in what is now Russia, at a site called Sungir, a group of Upper Paleolithic hunter-gatherers buried two children side by side. One was about 10 years old. The other was around 12. They were placed head to head in a single grave, and then they were covered in objects. More than 10,000 hand-carved mammoth ivory beads, hundreds of pierced fox teeth, polished bracelets, pendants, decorated clothing that probably looked like a beaded jumpsuit. Archaeologists estimate that producing those beads alone would have taken thousands of hours of skilled labor by a community living on the edge of an ice age, where every hour not spent finding food was a real risk. They did that for two children, not for a king, not for a warrior, for two kids who had not lived long enough to do much of anything yet. Whatever those people believed was happening to those children after death, they believed it hard enough to spend a year of collective work sending them there properly. Now here is where it gets darker. In a cave in Somerset, England, called Gough's Cave, archaeologists have found human bones dating to roughly 14,700 years ago that are covered in cut marks, not from violence, from butchery. The flesh has been carefully removed, the marrow extracted, and 3 of the skulls have been deliberately shaped into cups. Smoothed at the rim, inverted, held. Research led by Sylvia Bello at the Natural History Museum in London has also identified a deliberate zigzag pattern engraved on one of the arm bones, suggesting these acts happened in a ritual context, not a desperate one.
This is funerary cannibalism. Anthropologists have documented the practice all over the world, including among the Wari of the Brazilian Amazon, who until recently ate their dead because, in their words, leaving a loved one to rot in the ground was unimaginably cruel. The body was returned to the family, not surrendered to the dirt. For some ancient humans, eating the dead was the most loving thing you could do. Other groups went in the opposite direction. They held on. At Çatalhöyük in central Turkey, around 9,000 years ago, families buried their dead beneath the plaster floors of their houses. Sometimes the skull was removed, replastered, painted, and kept above ground for years before being reburied. In nearby Jericho, archaeologists have recovered plastered skulls from the same era, with cowrie shells set into the eye sockets and pigment painted onto reconstructed faces. These were portraits of dead family members, kept in the home, looked at, talked to. The ancestor was not gone. The ancestor was on the shelf. Then there is mummification. Most people associate it with Egypt, but the oldest known artificially mummified bodies on Earth belong to the Chinchorro, a fishing culture from what is now northern Chile and southern Peru. The earliest Chinchorro mummies date to around 7,000 years ago, predating the first Egyptian mummies by roughly 2,000 years. And the Chinchorro were not preserving kings. They mummified everyone: babies, fishermen, the poor, the unborn. They removed the organs, replaced the soft tissue with clay and reeds, and gave the deceased a painted mask. Some bodies were repainted and redecorated across generations, like family heirlooms that needed maintenance. So when did the cemetery, the modern idea that the dead live somewhere quiet, far from us, behind a fence, start to win? The pattern is the same one we see with privacy and sleep and almost everything else. Agriculture, cities, sanitation, industry. As populations grew, dead bodies became, very practically, a public health problem. As religions standardized, rituals were taken out of the household and given to specialists: priests, embalmers, undertakers. By the 19th century in Europe and America, the dead were no longer dressed by their families on the kitchen table. They were collected by professionals. In 1900, the overwhelming majority of Americans died at home, surrounded by their families. A century later, the majority died in institutions: hospitals, nursing homes, hospices. In the span of a single century, we did something our species had never done before. We stopped seeing our own dead. Most people you know have never washed a body, have never sat with one through the night, have never carried one to the place it was going to rest. For 99% of human history, that work was the work. It was how grief moved through a person. It was how a community proved, physically, that it had not abandoned someone. The anthropologist Barbara King, in her book How Animals Grieve, argues that mourning is not a uniquely human invention. Elephants return to the bones of dead family members for years, turning the skulls over with their trunks. Chimpanzee mothers carry dead infants for days. Crows gather around their dead in what unmistakably resemble funerals. The instinct to refuse the loss of someone we loved is older than our species. It may be older than the genus Homo itself. What humans did was take that instinct and build a civilization on top of it. Every cathedral, every cemetery, every photograph on a nightstand is a descendant of the body in the pit of bones, of Shanidar IV, of the children at Sungir. We did not invent death. We did not even invent grief. What we invented was the idea that the dead are still part of us, that you do not stop being a person just because you have stopped being alive. And tomorrow morning when you walk past that cemetery, just remember, every name on every stone is there because 430,000 years ago, someone climbed down into a pitch-black cave in Spain and refused to leave their dead behind. We have been refusing to let go of each other for a very, very long time.